All right, so there's our little moment to make sure editing works. And now we are going to have our 6th unit. Oh, and I didn't even count how many weeks this has been, but we're many weeks in, maybe 9 weeks in to the course. And we're going to talk about ideas and printing today. So it's sort of an esoteric concept, like the actual qualities of this are a little bit strange, but we're going to talk about ideas in general and sort of how do you have ideas, how do you manage ideas, and especially in a creative space like MakeHaven, how do you encourage yourself to have more ideas, and especially if you're collaborating. And then we're going to go through printmaking, like screen printing and all that sort of stuff. So there's lots of good details to go through here, but one of the things that I love to start off with is the Linus Pauling quote: for the best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. And he's a Nobel laureate. I think he's a double Nobel laureate. He's an amazing scientist that produced tons of good work all around atoms and chemistry things. And so if there's a few people in the world to get good advice about ideas on, a Nobel laureate is a pretty good spot. So we're going to cover these different topics, and we're going to start off with vocabulary of some of these ideas, some concepts, a story even, talk about how you generate ideas, sort of project management concepts that I'm sure you all have lots of experience with actually, and then we're going to cover screen printing. And because you have experience with all these different ideas, please feel free at any time, if you're in the room or if you're at home, unmute. You can join the conversation. We'd love to hear whatever input you've got to make sure that this all works out. But it's an important thing for us all to think about. And we've each got value that we're bringing to this conversation because we've all been on weird teams for jobs or businesses or whatever. And we're just going to try and explore that and see how it makes sense to fit in here at MakeHaven. And I love the Buddha quote: "The mind is everything and what you think you become," which is great. It's one of the reasons why I try to continue to always do creative things and engage in creative activities. It feels like then you can identify yourself more as a creative person. And the same is true in other directions also. Whatever you do a lot of, that's what you become. You are what you eat, cognitively. So that's the thing. I think it's gonna get very abstract today. And so I think the best way to deal with an abstraction is to talk about a concrete example. And so here's a story that I have for 2 students that I had a year or 2 ago. And one of these 2 kids just texted me today about an internship that they got. I'm very excited for them. But these 2 students wanted to build an instrument from scratch. They were doing this for Science Olympiad. It's a hyper nerdy science competition to see who can science best in the local area high schools. And so their competition, they needed to build an instrument. It had to have no pre-built instrument parts, except for strings. You were allowed instrument strings. It needed to stay in tune, and it needed to be as loud as possible. And at the time of starting this project, Nick, who you can see across the top row, he had never really built anything. He'd never used any tools. He was brand new to the whole experience. And so really, we started off with let's just make something that's vaguely guitar shaped. And so he built the box in the top left, the first build in 2018 at the start of the first school year. And he built that thing, and he realized it kind of looks like a guitar, but there's a lot of subtlety to get going. As the teacher, I kind of knew this one wasn't going to work out. It felt like getting the neck of a guitar is actually a really hard thing to get right. But it was important that he learned how to use the tools, that drilling and cutting with a saw, all of those things were really important for him to get some experience with in the first go around. We learned a ton. From there, we made some design choices and realized that the neck being long was bad, and he wanted to shorten it up. He wanted to hit sort of a cello, sort of a instrument kind of shape. And so we made this progression where he went through and redesigned it and made this sort of pear-shaped thing that worked out fairly well. This worked pretty well on the first year of the competition. And they had these turnbuckles that they'd use to tune it. So you can turn those things and it'll tighten the strings, and you get different tones that come out of it. We learned a lot. Only once it was totally built did he realize that the placement of these bridges is really important in the instrument. And so it worked well enough for the first year. But the second year, they had a few problems they wanted to fix. Like they realized that it fell out of tune. And so they wanted to come up with a solution that you tune it once and those turnbuckles wouldn't loosen over time. So they made this kalimba inspired egg, which they thought was really fun. And it's kind of fun, right? The little egg instrument is a neat one, but it just wouldn't get loud enough. And so they went back to the drawing board and redesigned, saying, and the other thing that they ran into this egg with was there'd be some resonance. So when they would when they'd pluck the instrument pieces, there would be wiggling across the egg. It turns out having the goofy shape of a violin or a cello helps because you have different lengths where sound can resonate. So that the length of a sound wave is really important to get it to resonate. And they eventually realized that that was an important feature that you couldn't just ignore in building your instrument. So an egg was basically almost just one diameter all the way across, not exactly, but pretty close, especially compared to this cello thing. And so then they did a full redesign. They built this. It was built, cut out on a CNC machine, not unlike the Gerber downstairs. They cut a whole bunch of layers that they glued up. They glued on a front face and then strung it up and were able to build an instrument. This final instrument could hold its tune week to week, being carried around on a bus through the winter cold back into a warm building, which is actually pretty hard on most instruments to keep your tune through all that movement. And so they were able to build an instrument that could hold its tune, and it needed to be at least 70 decibels. It was able to be 75 to 80 decibels when strummed properly. I mean, it was just incredible to see the amount of gain that they could go through in the process of building and rebuilding and rebuilding. The instrument that they made, it looks sort of linear now, but let me tell you, those 2 years it did not feel linear in the moment. It was just sort of a chaos of like, okay, we need to build something. It needs to make sound. Competition's next week. What are we going to do? It was a whole series of rushed deadlines and like little guesses that turned out to be good or bad. There were many more failed instruments that aren't pictured here. All of that is sort of an important part of how you go from I need to make something to it's made and it works well. And that progression looks pretty linear. And over 2 years, these kids did a great job. But thinking about all the hijinks that it takes to go from a thought to a product is what we're going to try and focus on today. Sort of how do you go from an idea into something that's real? And it's ultimately going to be through a series of cycled improvements. That's the core of it. That's the secret sauce. So we're going to talk about some vocab, some terms that I'm going to use a lot. And I want to make sure that we have a similar understanding. The things that we'll talk about are goals. And so these are the things that you want to have solved. So goals are, like in the case of the instrument, they wanted to have an instrument. They needed it to be able to hold its tune, and it needed to have a certain amount of volume. Those are the things that need to be solved, the stuff that you really want to make sure happens. And hopefully you can identify your goals for any project as well as possible. Whether it's a door decoration or a footstool or a snail sculpture, as long as you have a target, something you're really working towards, your goals can be well defined. That helps a lot. Constraints then are how you put boundaries on your project. You maybe don't want to spend more than a certain amount of money. It has to fit inside of a carry-on suitcase. It needs, any sort of constraint that you might have. Maybe it can only use a 12-volt battery. You don't want to use a bigger battery than that. Constraints are things that really can limit your project and give you an idea of how much you want to put a boundary on it. Iterations are going to be really important. Those are each time you build a solution, hopefully with some improvement. The iterations for that instrument, there were at least like 4 that were depicted on this. So the square one, the pear-shaped one, the egg, and then the cello-shaped piece. Those all came through. And those are each iterations, different builds of the entire thing, where they had to basically start from scratch in those cases. Sometimes you can iterate with just little adjustments, but usually that means rebuilding from the beginning. Brainstorming and design thinking, we're gonna have a couple of slides on these, but these are formal processes that we'll get down to. Sketches. And sketches, I really think, are valuable. They lead to lots of conversation. Just having like a quick sketch or a model, those are important. A model is usually a mock-up, a little bit more detailed than a sketch. And then there's a proof of concept. This is something that's super helpful just so that you can like check to make sure that it works. And so proof of concepts are really a critical step. If you've got like a crazy idea and you think it might work, absolutely a proof of concept is something that you want to test. Or like in the case of their instrument, they needed to make sure that they understood that if the front plate of the instrument leaked air, that would really hurt their volume. And so they needed to find ways to try and test that. They sort of hot glued the top shut to see if closing it made it sound a lot better. And it did, right? So having different ideas, different ways to test ideas can be really helpful. But all of that starts with generating ideas. And so generating ideas is something that's amazing and complicated and really fundamentally human. And the way that we do it is really different from the way that we're starting to learn to ask machines to do this. We generate ideas organically. So everybody thinks the brain is mesmerizing. Here it is on Reddit. This is neurons making new connections to other neurons. I love this little video. Those neurons crawling around. Sort of, it's kind of wild to watch neurons do their climbing. You can see messages being sent back and forth with the highlights that are there. It's not quite exactly that literal. There's something else going on there, but you can see and imagine them reaching out, trying to make physical connections and then sending things back and forth throughout the neurons. It's mesmerizing. Oh, let's stop here, go back. We'll get back off of Reddit. And so these neural connections, all the way from Reddit to researchers, where you've got time lapse of neural migration, these different movements are really a physical part of how you think and understand, which is kind of wild, right? Like there's implications to that beyond just the fact that they exist, that it's fascinating that they sort of crawl around. Like the physical implication is that eureka moments almost never happen. It's a great story that Isaac Newton sat under a tree, got hit on the head by an apple, and then boom, he understands gravity. But it's almost completely apocryphal. Like that's very unlikely how he came up with the idea of gravity, but it makes for a great story. Most of the time when people have ideas, you're connecting thoughts that are already sort of close together, and they're based on the connections that you've already got in your brain. The more that you practice patterns of thinking, the more robust those become, and the more pruned away the ones that you don't use go away. So like back in high school, I was a wrestler. I have not done that since high school. Those like neural connections are well pruned away. This like growing pathways and pruning is something that's very, very active in young children. It's how they can learn new languages just by sitting in a room listening to adults speak. You know, little kids can go from not talking to talking so seemingly overnight. And you've got this pattern that exists. It really is something that over a lifetime changes quite a lot. There's plenty of good experience out there in the world and good research to say that it peaks somewhere around 26, which feels kind of like an odd number to pick, but Albert Einstein had his miracle year with 5 papers when he was 26. Isaac Newton, just to reference 2 scientists, science teacher, scientists, Isaac Newton did his work inventing calculus and physics in the same move when he was 26, avoiding a pandemic. There's, I think that Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, I think she was 26 also. Like it's not uncommon for people to do some of their most productive work right at the height of the brain hitting those neural connections. Now I am well past 26. I think you can still do plenty of productive work past 26, but it is fascinating that this process of growing and pruning connections is something that's very, very active in the human brain and something that really directly impacts how people are productive over a lifetime. It's fascinating. But basically, if you have a good brainstorming process, you'll take advantage of the fact that your brain builds small connections in a deliberate way. And so that's really what we're going to try and focus on, because that's all you can do. I really think that sketches are an important part of that. And so sketches like on a napkin, like up here, this is maybe an architectural sketch on a napkin, or like even the resolution with which we see Mario that has shifted over his like 36 years of existence. At first, he was just like a few pixels. And then as time passes, at some point, you see his gloves, right? Who knew he was wearing gloves in the 90s? Maybe he wasn't. But you get a better and better picture the more you try and envision what's going on, and the more the resolution can be resolved. Whether it's a sketch like this, or you go into a formal drawing, architectural drawing program, you can get closer and closer to a better concept of the world. Models can really be helpful also. So here's like an architectural model. It looks like this is probably of ancient Greece or something. And so this model will really help people better wrap their heads around something. And you can even take it to an extreme, like this is SolidWorks simulating some process where you're able to look at the stresses or the inflow of injection molding that part. And so when you're sketching or modeling, you can really start to think about things in an abstract concepts in concrete ways, because your brain can only make the littlest of connections. And I don't mean that I mean that in a way that is useful, right? Your brain is going to be able to think about things more easily when it has a more concrete version in front of it. So when you build the first guitar and it kind of half doesn't work, it's a bummer, but now you've got things to point at and say, this could get better. This is the thing that we can improve. By having something that you can wrap your head around a little bit better, like a sketch or a first prototype, you have an ability to make improvements that are small adjustments that you wouldn't be able to spot otherwise. Somebody who's really adept at 3D modeling might be able to do some of that from a model, like look at a model and then make improvements. But there's a lot of this that just by having a sketch or a model, you can get better access to an idea that's sort of not quite gelled inside your mind. And I don't know about any of you, but I'm actually have aphantasia. I like don't see pictures in my head. And so having a sketch or a model is really, really important so that I have a thing to look at. And I think that some people can really imagine really well inside their brains, just having a picture unfold in front of them. And some people really can't. Either way, it really helps to have a physically drawn model, because even if you think that you have a solid idea, getting it to flitter from sort of existence into reality can make this much, much more approachable. Good examples of ways that we can make little connections. So the game Fold It is a fascinating example of connecting ideas and how people are really, really good at it. It's only just become a reality that machine learning has started to become good at protein folding. But for a long time, we've been able to take the genetic code that builds proteins and know the order that all of that your proteins are built. So inside your body, you have proteins that sort of do things. They're the mechanisms inside your cells that help you process sugar, make food, reproduce your cells. All that different stuff is done by proteins. We can figure out their chain, their order, their code to build them. But then how do you physically assemble them is tricky. And it's so hard that computers aren't good at solving it. They're just starting to be. But at some point around 2014, 2015, somewhere in there, maybe, or 2010 paper. Yeah, I think I learned about it in 2014. A 2010 paper in Nature credited Fold It's players. Researchers had made a game that said, we know the order of these proteins, we know the amino acid sequence, but we don't know how they fit together. And so researchers built a video game that they posted for free online for people to play so that they could figure out how to fold these proteins into a reasonable shape. We knew what the order, the sequence of the amino acids was. We knew how to tell if it was a good design or bad design, but actually building the design programmatically was really hard. And it turned out you had to make a few wrong answers early on in order to get this to work. That's why computers weren't good at it. You had to do some non-intuitive things early to end up with the best long-term solutions. And it's something that really is still not hard or not easy for computers to do, but people can learn the game, learn how to play it, and really make those connections work in ways that are hard to describe or imagine in other technical ways. Your ability, your capacity to make new ideas come about is one of the things that's fundamentally human about you and one of your absolute greatest strengths. And don't ever let any technological advancement make you question that. It is one of your most valuable pieces. So how do you go about like trying to invoke that if you're not going to build a video game that asks people to solve your science problem? You're going to use a couple of formal processes, maybe. You can do brainstorming or design thinking. these are very corporate ideas at their core. You might have been asked to do these in a business meeting at some point or another, where you need to do that. We need a new product and let's brainstorm some solutions. Might have been a thing that you've been asked to do. The design thinking came about from IDEO, which started out of Stanford, basically. And then brainstorming was a little bit earlier by a specific person. They published a book. But basically, they're really specific processes for idea generation and selection so that you can grab ideas, you can put them all out there as sort of a judgment-free zone of generating ideas and then filtering out the best ones that you've got. And so this strategy is something that's really good to go after. And I like to think about them as two sort of analogous processes. Brainstorming over on the left was Alex F. Osborne, 1967 book, Applied Imagination. He's the guy with lots of sticky notes up on the wall, do all of that. You make sure that you post as many things as you can, and then try and have all the ideas and just throw things at the wall and see what sticks. And so from there, you generate lots of ideas. The overlap is really in the middle. There's a judgment-free idea generation phase. You prune away those ideas. It's not unlike how the brain works in and of itself. And then you have implementation and reflection. For the design thinking phase, this has gained lots of favor recently from IDEO of California. Super popular in business, especially in Silicon Valley. It's part of a broader design cycle, which we're going to get into in a minute. But the big one here is that there's an empathy piece that's been added in as a main feature of that design process. So you think about how does this impact your end users? How does it change the idea? How does that all fit together? Those are really important parts of this. Within this design thinking piece, it's more of a cycle that you go through, whereas brainstorming is kind of a once and done kind of piece, which feels, I don't know, that feels like how a large institution would do it. Let's do this one effort to try and be creative, and then we're done with that. Versus design cycle is definitely more of a cyclic process. So building that cello, cycling through and trying 4 different iterations is really valuable. And basically, design cycles, super easy to define. These are different versions from different sectors of industry in the world. And basically, as soon as you have a graphics editor, you make a design cycle, is what I've learned. There's very little difference between these. They often point you in the plan, do, check, act cycle sort of way. There's different ones that fit different models. There's ones for continuous integration, continuous development, CI/CD, those sorts of things, drug discovery. There's different processes that you could use, and all of there's some pieces you don't want to get caught up in the details. The main thing that I think about, but maybe it's my bias as a science teacher, is that the scientific method and the design cycle are pretty analogous, right? That you form a question, there's a hypothesis, prediction, testing, analyze, and the same works for the design cycle, where you have an idea, you ask a question, you make things, you try it, and a formal process is just a structure. You're probably not in MakeHaven going to sit down and say, I would like to do step 2 of my design process now. But instead, it's good to just think about it as a cycle that you let yourself go through, and that you're going to pass through it more than once with the projects that you care about. Because and some things you just want to do a one and done, but if you really care about a project, doing it multiple times is rarely a hiccup. And Vincent, like you're what's the number of slugs you printed? Embarrassing. Don't worry about it. We're not gonna. Okay, we don't need to. Yeah, I have some projects. I'm definitely have built them many times, and there's no problem with that. Sometimes you need to do it just to get yourself through the cycle again and again, to learn little pieces. But here's, if I were to try and boil it down, and please do not, this is in no way an authoritative process. I would say define the problem, generate ideas, build an iteration, and evaluate the iteration. Then you go through the cycle again. And if you care about a project enough to really make sure that it's successful, you're going to build iterations more than one time. If it's something that you want to be one and done, like that is a totally legitimate way to address some problems in life. Find a solution and finish it. But if you wanted to make something great, if you want to really go after something, you're going to build it many times. I'm one of the perennial projects that I have probably talked about before with the group, or several of you individually at least, I built a robot bartender. And with that, I had a definition of the problem. I generated ideas, built an iteration. I've built 2 or 3 different versions. I'm going to get to 5 or 6 before I feel like I'm happy with it. And I have a long-term plan for how to go through this design cycle, making sure that each time it produces a slightly better result. And so having this cycle that you work through can help take projects that you really care about and make sure that they work as nicely as you want them to.
Didn't know that there were so many different kinds of motor oil for a robot bartender.
Oh, yeah, all the robot bartender motor oil is really, that's the key difference. No, I mean, it's those sorts of things. You start off like the first one was just to get, can I get a pump to move liquids around? And then from there, like, how do you make it nicer? What's the next thing that, okay, so now I've got a pump that moves when I press a button. You like find your way through. At this point, I've got a database that's running it. It's got pumps that are connected to a server. Like you can make an order from a cell phone, like you, and eventually it will get better and better. There's actually an entire set of competitions for those in Las Vegas and a few other places that one day I'll probably enter just to bring the machine and like, and make drinks there. But let's not get too caught in that. Project management. So let's say you have an idea, you've generated ideas, you have a project you're going after, and how are you going to manage that project? This is something that you might have seen in business, in your work life, or in other ways. There's grassroots open source projects. These are the cool online. Linux is an example. All the open source software you've ever used. Generally, you get a few people that start working around a project. They organize themselves as much as they need to, and then they build it from the bottom up. That's a great way to get organized. That's how you want all your political movements to run. That's where you get buy-in if it's a thing at a large institution, how you get your employees to do what you want them to. A grassroots movement is really an important piece. Monarchy management is the bad manager that we've all had at some point in life, where somebody says, this is what you're going to do. I'm going to tell you what to do. I might even micromanage you so that you get to do exactly what I think is best for the group. And in that case, you sort of have somebody from above telling you what needs to happen. And that is, there are contexts where that is appropriate, right? There's moments from time to time where that's what you need to do. Like I imagine my time back at McDonald's, there were moments where it was all teenagers working the McDonald's, and you needed a manager that was strong enough to say, like, this is what you need to do, go and do it, right? But then there's other moments where you've got a room full of adults and it feels kind of demeaning for that to happen. So the dynamic there is tricky. There's a hope. Development teams sometimes try and thread the needle in between with agile development or DevOps, some human-centered development things. That's the best example in writing that I've seen of how to make this work. But that you can have a carefully structured management that hopefully is constantly thinking about goals, prioritizing what customers want, and having open conversations that make it feel sort of grassrootsy while there's still a strong management component. So somewhere in between the grassroots on the left and the monarchy on the right is hopefully where most happy people live if you're working on a team. And it could be that we're working in teams together as we move through this. But I'm sure you've all got some experience with these different realms, right? Yeah, head nods in the room. So here's how I suggest, if you're running a project, this is my recommendation. Try spiral project planning. And I think that this is maybe a military strategy at first, but you want to make a minimum viable product by the first time you go through your design cycle. So you're going to start off by questioning sort of what you want, establishing your goals and constraints. Then you generate your ideas, you make your ideas from there, you build a solution, you build your iteration, and then you evaluate that iteration. By the time you make it through the loop one time, you should have something that's deliverable. So if all of a sudden the timer is up and you have to turn it in for like a paper or homework assignment, or the project has come due, you need to deliver, the competition for your instrument is tomorrow, you have some deliverable that at least exists. So that you can walk into the competition, you can show it off for the party, the Halloween party, you can have a costume that is not nothing, right? You can have something that's deliverable. Then if you have enough time, you could go through this design cycle again. Each time you go through, each time you cross that barrier on the left, you'll have evaluated something that is real and concrete. And so you can think about, okay, if I'm adjusted this, I would need to make this change. Or if I adjusted this, it would work just a little bit better. A common one I think about is like doors and door hinges, right? When you're hanging a door in a doorway and you put the hinges on, you don't often think about the fact that you need to sort of trim the edge of the door in just a hair. So it's not exactly 90 degrees, otherwise the door won't close. That's usually the last thought that I have when hanging a door. If the door frame is really tight, you go to close the door and the door will actually stop itself from closing unless you shave off a little bit. That's why you usually should have a gap, but those are problems that you can't get until you're at the second iteration of hanging the door. I've hung the door, it swings, but I can't close it. Okay, now what do I need to change to make it close? Right, you're making little adjustments to a concrete reality that you have in front of you. All the while thinking about, I need a minimum viable product. Even a poorly hung door, you could probably slam shut, even if you can have a hard time getting it open again. But this process, especially if you're going through full, complete second builds, it works really great if you don't mind buying a whole second set of products. If you've got something irreplaceable in your build, then you probably need to be a little bit more careful or subtle with how you do this, right? And as hobbyists in this space, there's definitely going to be moments where like you can't, you bought this nice piece of mahogany, you only get one, right? Like you can't justify going home and telling your significant other, well, I needed to buy a really expensive piece of wood again. And so like coming up with that threshold for yourself is an important dynamic so that you can think about how that fits in within a limited budget on this spiral project planning. There's a couple of other things that are important to think about while you're designing projects, like top down or bottom up. If possible, it's definitely better to try and build projects from little pieces that you bring together and where you can run tests on little aspects of it. Like if you wanted to build an instrument, it would be great if you could tension the string and then strum it and see if that works, right? And then you build a sound box and you sort of tap it on the front without even bringing it to the strings and see if that part works, if the sound box of your instrument works. And then you can integrate them together once you know that each piece is working pretty well in its own system. If you instead build a system where you're like, okay, I'm going to build a roller coaster and it needs to do all these things and I won't know if any of it works until it's all done. And then we just press go on the roller coaster ride, right? In that case, it'll be really hard to identify what's broken because all of the pieces have to work together in order for it to run. If you can instead test each little section, it's a lot easier to make sense of all of it when it's running together. Having little tests that you can do is really important for all those little integrated pieces. Along with that, a big thing that we like to talk about is modular projects. The monolithic project, and this is a fun, there's some great videos out there about this for developers, but monolithic projects are sort of all or nothing things, like one big file to rule them all. Your one giant Python project that runs your entire web server and the database and all the other things that all kind of fit into one giant mush, versus modular projects and microservices where you can have big parts, like maybe some major sections and then some subplots that are tied in. If you have little sections, usually they become easier to test and diagnose those different pieces, and easier to troubleshoot. Sometimes I will say the like Docker Kubernetes world that developers have figured out works to make modular projects also can be pretty troublesome to diagnose. But you can get to these sort of modular pieces where you have different parts that you can test and then bring them together. Usually that makes for easier times building these things. Another key piece, and I know we've talked about this a little bit, and the modular monolithic we've talked about some earlier, very early on, is serial and parallel. In the space, if you can do serial, if you're doing serial development, your projects all have to go in order. If you can do parallel development like this flow chart, you could maybe start a 3D print, and while that's printing, work on the next thing, right? You can start one project, one part of the project going, and then while a machine is running that piece, work on something else. You know, while your laser is etching or engraving something, you could be designing something to be cut on the vinyl cutter then after. So those pieces, if you can overlap them, that can really help in your projects running according to schedule. And if you can't, if you're stuck, sometimes that can lead to delays and slowdowns. So this is a tricky, hopefully you could say like, I have this idea. I want to click print on 5 machines. They'll all go at the same time. And then you'll be able to maximize your efficiency, but that's usually pretty hard. We talked a little bit in the first week also about supply side versus demand side time management. This is something that, we're in week 9, I think. And so hopefully you've all had this only go well, but it might be that if you're thinking about how you've been able to spend your time on projects, that you may have gotten caught in either supply side or demand side time management. For supply side, you're thinking ahead about how much time you have for the week and choosing the project that fits. That's a great way to live. But sometimes you fall into the other space, demand side, where you say like, I want to do this project, and then it grows, it balloons, it takes up lots of time. And then your time is sort of manipulated by the project itself, where it's demanding of you all the different times that have to be there. Salvador Dali nailed it with time is weebly wobbly here with the melty clocks. There are many occasions where I feel like that is the world I'm walking around in. But hopefully you can avoid this if you can try your very best to stick on the supply side time management. But it's a dynamic, it's sort of a dichotomy that you hope to stay on the right side of, but you never can. Another one, you might have run into projects where triage is an important concept, where basically you figure out what's the next thing that you need to solve. And there are definitely moments where triage, hopefully not like Yale Health triage, but triage in some capacity is important for the projects that you're working on. What's the next thing that you have to fix? Usually when things get broken, I go into triage mode of like, okay, what's the last thing that worked? How do I try that again? How do I unbreak just this one little thing so that you can try and find your way to success? You want to try and find the paths that are the most productive for you. And triage is really helpful in getting there. Also, while we're talking about projects, documenting as you go is really essential. Take pictures as you go. We talked about this early on. Take pictures, document. It's been a little bit. We've had a bit of time. This is our last week with a break coming up. Our last week in this section, and then we're gonna have a break, and a few things will change. But if you've been putting off documenting, this is a casual reminder. It's a good thing to do. If you got some downtime and you don't want to talk to your uncle, let's say Jeffrey. I don't have an Uncle Jeffrey. So let's say you're going to Thanksgiving and you'd really rather not talk to Uncle Jeffrey. You maybe that's a great time to do some documenting, just to pass the time. Say you're busy doing things off in the corner. But document as you work is usually the best way to go, to take pictures as you're going through it, write things down, make yourself some notes, and then do that as you're working on it, build up your website on the fly. Now, I would say ultimately, like after years of making things in spaces like MakeHaven, communicating your ideas is probably more important than actually having ideas. I've known a lot of people that have made solutions that only they can use and that no one else will ever be able to touch. That might be your goal. Honestly, like we're not trying to pitch business solutions here. That's not the goal at all. But it's important to think about where you want to fall in this dynamic. Do you want your idea to communicate? Are you making something that's just for you? Or do you want to share it with people? Those are important things to think about. If you're trying to do something professionally, you're definitely going to want to be able to communicate, to advertise, to market what you're doing. If you're just doing it for you, all of that kind of goes out the window. Then it's whatever you want. That's what matters. But it's really, for me, increasingly important to think about how you can communicate those skills that you've got, those projects that you've done, and how you get those ideas out to the world is really essential. And worth like reflecting on when you've got a minute to really process how your ideas can fit together and fit with the world. But we made it through the big ideas section. It was a lot of me just talking and a few head nods, but we've got some really cool things to think about with that. And I would love anytime you want to talk about ideas. I think that it's a fascinating part of being a person, is how ideas happen, how they're made, how you can push an idea to grow or to correctly contract a little bit so that it fits the scope of what you're up to. But getting ideas to work is something that's profoundly a part of people. And I think that the creativity that it takes to have and process those ideas, for me, and I think for most people, is really a human need, right? I work in a high school, and there is always graffiti in a bathroom. And I think kids have a need to get it out, right? They have a need to get some creativity out, even if it's a little maladaptive. Don't get me wrong, but that need to create, to leave a mark, to do those things, I think is fundamentally a human need rather than just like a nice to have. And it feels, for me, a little freeing to really lean into that and let that be an important part of how I interact with the world. And hopefully that fits with you too. You can see that creativity outlet is an important part of being you, like making it's an important part of you, of the way that you exist in the world. And I think that if you were to reflect on the things that you've made in MakeHaven, there is a part of you in them, right? You are expressing some aspect of yourself externally by the things that you make. Some of your identity is conveyed into the things that you have produced here and that you will produce here, which is fascinating, right? That's a really interesting relationship to have. And it makes me want to invest more into those things so that I can be proud of them as they go. There's certainly things I make that I don't think that highly of, but choosing where you want to fit with that, how you want to communicate, how your work all fits together is an important part of reflecting a little bit on your work in the space. So I get sucked back into this thinking and ideas section all the time, but printing, let's talk about printing. This is what we're going to physically do. Having ideas is neat, but it's not like a deliverable at the end of the week. And so what we're going to do this week is printing things, and we're going to do it in like a pretty constrained way. There's a really awesome printing area, and Ileana, who's with us, she's our co-instructor, is an absolute pro at printing things. And so we're going to talk about printing, and if you want to chime in, you should just hop over here. Yeah. No, you're good. You can take over as much as you want. So we're going to do some printing. And so printing, we're going to cover as many aspects as we can figure out. The printing press is like the iconic thing if you've gone to Epcot in Disney World, which is fascinating for a bunch of reasons and maybe a little ethnocentric, but they talk about the printing press and how it propelled advancement and how it made accessible copies of written text really an important marker of how the Western world moved forward. Printing presses were movable type printing was reinvented many, many times over many, many centuries. So we're not trying to say that this pictured one is the one, but it's definitely a thing that helped proliferate the widespread knowledge that you could get by a printed book, a printed text, a newspaper, those sorts of things. Once they became more commonplace, people were able to access a whole lot more information. I heard someone say once, and this is probably not true, but that like a person who was my great grandfather might have only ever read a current modern newspaper's worth of text, right? Just they didn't have access to much text in their life, or the ability to read it even. Versus now, we're constantly inundated with text all the time. Kids learn how to read before you even expect them to, because they want to learn what buttons to press to make the plants and zombies fight each other, right? So that is totally a difference that has changed, but it's changed how people work. We're going to cover all of these different nuances of printing. We're going to try and go in sort of a historical order-ish, roughly, and look at how this all fits together. First up, movable typography. And so this is something that is really, it's awesome that this machine, the one that's in the top picture here, that is a MakeHaven machine. This movable type printing machine is a great way to get ink onto letters. Those letters can transfer the ink to paper, and with a sort of soft squishy layer, you get this beautiful embossed text look transferred to the paper that you've got. It is a high-end product to get embossed printed text. If you're paying for wedding invitations and you want this on them, you be ready to pay, because it's a lot. But you could make them here if you felt like it. And so there's all sorts of cool things to this, but that printing press that's depicted here would have been based on movable type, just like this. have.
No, I was just gonna say that like one of the things that's cool about movable type is that you can get whole drawers full of alphabets and quote unquote fonts for not that much money because hardly anybody uses them anymore. And that's part of why MakeHaven has a whole bunch of different fonts worth of movable type that you can use on that machine. I have not personally used this machine, mostly because I have to talk to Bob about certain specifics about this machine because it's his. He donated this machine to MakeHaven. That's Bob McGonigal, the other guy who also is a printmaking facilitator, who's here on Sundays, I believe. And then the other cool thing about movable type is that you can design and CNC your own movable type, either on the Tormac if you want to make it out of metal, or on the CNC out of wood. Like it is a thing that you can do if you wanted to make like a monogram or like letterpress printing. It's a design that's basically a stamp. You ink it, you roll it across with the massive press, and you get like your own custom made print that is basically, this is like the simplest way to do it. But yeah, so that's definitely like, you see the movable type in the bottom corner. That is something that you yourself can design in Inkscape, make it a CNC file and CNC it, and you have something you can use on this machine.
Yeah, you could even like, thinking about it that way, you could even design how it's going to go. You could probably cut a lot of it on the laser if you're willing to get the right materials, maybe. And then you can choose like kerning and fonts, and all of that can be decided. But I would love, like, if somebody really got into this movable type, I think what would be super cool would be to say like, okay, all the letters are exactly this tall. I'm going to take my personal logo and make a block of it that's exactly that tall and is the height of 2 strings of letters. So you could have like, I write a poem, and then at the end of the haiku is boom, here's my block. And so you know it was written by me and typed by me. Like that would actually be really cool, to have that sort of a process worked out by making your own blocks for this machine. It's hundreds of years old, this technology, much more than the Gutenberg press. This has been around for a long, long time. And so it's really cool to see this process get used. I've not seen anyone actually physically do it in the space, but it's an amazing machine, and I want to try it. It's on the list. Block printing. So the movable type is maybe historically we might have gotten these two reversed, but block printing is a fascinating process that can be used to make, generally this is more for art sort of pursuits, but you have a block of some type that can be carved and then used to make a print. This is really where popular art became first super famous, from the accounts that I have understood in my meager art history classes, which probably could be undermined with good fact checking. But block prints like this make it possible for you to make many, many copies of an art piece, so they can become very popularized. The tsunami down here in the bottom is a classic example of it was printed many, many times, and it became a popular piece that is iconic because of its variety and availability. There's other prints that can happen. You can see lots of them get carved. We do have a block printing press downstairs, and if you have multiple presses, you can include multiple colors. This is, and I think it's Jen, the facilitator. They make their holiday card every year by a linoleum block print. I think they said of the place they live and that they move too much on Slack, but not to, Jen's great. I hope that that's all for good reasons. The key is that you can carve out whatever fun shape you want, and then you slather on some ink, press it onto whatever you want to print it onto, and there you go. You have your block print. If you can apply even pressure, it's a lot easier. I've done this with Ruby before, and she's sort of a master at it, where like she uses a spoon and just goes at it, rubbing the paper into the block, like a 4 foot wide by 6 foot long piece. And so you can block print at any sort of a size and scale. It's really cool to see this happen, and you can make really fantastic art from this process. Where like if you're doing a block print with wood, you get all the wood grain and all those features from the material in the print itself. And that can be a real benefit for the like natural variety of the material to be added in. If you want to avoid it, linoleum is a great material. It's super easy to get a little linoleum square and just carve out the parts that you want. But you can also do it in wood or lots of other materials. So
there are also like even softer materials in linoleum that are also available now. Like Speedball makes this pink stuff. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's basically carving block that is super soft, super easy to carve. It doesn't get a lot of fine detail, but if you just want to get some basic shapes on a block, it's really easy to carve.
should I pop the camera over to this example?
And that's actually a good example of the ideas thing because I can show you.
All right, hold on a second. We're gonna do some technical wizardry on the presenting. Stop share. Doing this, back over to here. And cut. Okay, so this is what we're seeing.
All right, so this is a block that has been carved. This is essentially, yeah, let me flip it this way so that it's like, you can get the whole thing. All right, so that is a block. This is a linoleum piece. It's not mounted to wood. It's just a piece of linoleum that's been carved. Now this, I brought this one specifically because I did this one in 2 hours. Now it looks like a lot more work than 2 hours, but if you think about it in terms of, especially because we're talking about ideas this time around, I took a course specifically, like not really a course, it was basically a workshop where you had access to a really beautiful press. And they're like, you can basically make whatever you want, but it has to be done in 3 hours. And I was like, fine, I can do this. So I sat down and I sketched out something really basic that I wanted to do. And that is essentially, I did that maybe 10, this took me 10 minutes to sketch out.
Rotate it around. So
Yeah, essentially. And then that I transferred using graphite transfer paper onto this block. And I knew that this is another example of iteration where like, I knew that this was not necessarily what I wanted to do, like final, but it was a simple enough idea that if I wanted to embellish this, it was very easy to embellish. So once this was transferred onto the block, I started deciding, okay, I want more detail in the eye. That's really easy to carve in. The fur is just a lot of very careful strokes over and over and over again, but they're short. So it doesn't actually take that long to get those marks in there. So then once you do this, you get another iteration where you could print it in different colors. You can do different effects. If there are parts of this you don't like, you can block it out on the press so that it doesn't print maybe the moons, it just prints the head. I don't actually have a finished print of this, unfortunately.
there's I've got some friends who do make a block printing class. Unibrow Society is the company of my friends, if you wanted to look them up, but they're really cool and they do multiple different colors. So if you have prints like this and you wanted to, just like you were talking about, if you wanted to print the moons in like a yellow and the wolf thing in like a black, you could do different blocks with different sections and then print them separately. Maybe even like the middle of the eye is going to be yellow, like the moons.
Yeah, and there's actually like people who will carve blocks like this and then cut out the parts of it that they want to be different colors, ink those separately, pop them back in like a puzzle, and then basically run it through the press, and you can get multiple colors just by making this a puzzle. Like you've cut out the pieces that you want to be different colors, because linoleum's super easy to cut. You just need an Olfa blade and a really steady hand, but you can definitely get that going. Now, the cool thing about this is that if you really wanted to give it a go, you could, in essence, laser etch a piece of acrylic or some other material, and then have the laser itself cut the pieces apart so you could have different colors. So like, this is definitely one of those things where like you could start with a simple design and then take it into very interesting places. Like it does not have to just stay a static design. You can take the idea a lot further than you would ever think to take it. But I just wanted to show that because that's like, this is a base, essentially block printing is like very simple essence. And there are some here at MakeHaven that you can use in the printmaking section that are just there. If you first come, first serve, if you want to try that this week.
It's also pretty approachable to buy at Arts and Craftsmen across the street.
Yep.
And like we have all the carving tools.
We-
So if you wanted to just take a linoleum piece, like if you had a spare square of linoleum from your basement when you redid it once 10 years ago, you could probably even use that to do block printing.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be quite as nice as like the art linoleum, but it's a similar, similar in many ways that it would cut easily.
An art linoleum, this is a linoleum tile from a
Oh,
hardware store. This is like even cheaper than what you would find in Artisan Craftsman, but it's essentially what you find in Artisan Craftsman is a little bit more flexible and it's a little deeper, so you don't have to run the risk of carving too deep.
Hmm.
For beginners, I usually recommend having the ones that are mounted on wood. That way, if you carve too deep, you just hit wood. You don't hit the essentially
whatever is
the
beneath.
fiber that's underneath.
Yeah.
So you have a little bit more room to like judge because you don't need a lot of pressure, but that's block printing. And I wish I had an example of a screen print, but I do not.
Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna hop back over into presenting mode. So one moment, please, everybody. Screen 2 and share. All right. And here, let's get OBS out of the way. This thing. Get it over here. All right. So as we're moving through, this is the system we use for all of that. As we're moving through block printing, this is a great way to make art, especially if you wanted to do that or to have on the fly any shape that you wanted. You could totally do text on that. Screen printing is the next one they're going to talk about. This is a big printing process. This is a super useful one. Most of the crazy t-shirts that you have bought and worn in your life, they were probably screen printed at some level. You use a screen mesh, a mesh screen that gives a substrate for a photo emulsion and ink filter. Basically, so that when you press ink on, it goes through the exposed parts of the screen, the emulsion sort of fills in other areas, and that's the process that you use. So you can make or buy a screen, you apply this weird emulsion stuff to it, which is a chemical that cures with light. And if you go through the badging process for the screen printing machine downstairs, you'll absolutely run through this entire process. So don't feel like these 5 bullet points are the only way that you get access to it. Then you expose the emulsion. So if you have a design that you like, what you do is actually use light to harden the emulsion. So it's like an emulsion is a chemical with a suspended solid in it, and that suspended stuff sort of solidifies throughout the whole piece, and it makes solid, it fills in the gaps of this mesh throughout most of the screen, except you can sort of see here is a hand with a magnifying glass. That would be the exposed screen, and the emulsion is all of the darkened area that's filled in. And basically the ink will go through with this magnifying glass in hand, but it won't go through all of the darker area where the emulsion is. And so the emulsion fills in lots of the screen, but once you and it takes the exposure from light, you put basically a dark opaque thing on here, and that opaque material will block light from hitting it. But then once you've got this covered up, you shine a bright light down onto your screen. It sets all of the emulsion except to the pieces that have been blocked, and that's your design. Because the emulsion has a fair amount of structure to it, you can get very, very high detail in your work piece, as high as you can get a print, and really fantastic levels of detail. So this is a great way to build designs. It's been used for a long, long time. But basically, once you expose your emulsion, any of the parts that are currently here, this sort of dark red, those stay. You can rinse out all the uncured stuff, and then you print your ink through that exposed portion. So basically, it'll feel like you're just sort of squeegeeing ink through that opening, and that's how you get it transferred onto the shirt or bag or piece of wood or whatever it is you want to screen print onto. This is a really fascinating process, and this is basically the process that we want to do with all of you. The actual like printing process is what we want to do this week.
Yeah. I will mention, like, this is a very complicated stencil. This is essentially what you're doing. But the benefits of using this stencil as opposed to any other stencil is that you don't have to worry about cutting the way that you're cutting things. Like, you know how stencil lettering very specifically has lines cut through parts of the letters so that you don't lose like the center of your A, for example. So with screen printing, you don't have to worry about any of that, but it is essentially a very complex stencil. You are blocking out anything you don't want to paint, and you are putting paint only in the areas that you want to show. And that's why you can get much more complex designs with a screen rather than just cutting out a stencil. Even if you're laser cutting a stencil, you still have those areas that you have to be careful of that'll just like drop out and you'll just lose. Whereas with a screen, everything is essentially on a different substrate that's stuck to the screen. So it's not going anywhere.
Right. And we'll talk a little bit more actually next week. Next time we're doing class after Thanksgiving, we'll be doing Inkscape and vinyl cutting. So we'll be talking about stencil fonts and all those sorts of things. Here, it's nice that you just sort of get to gloss over why you might need a stencil font with screen printing.
Yeah.
You can do whatever design you feel like.
Yeah, you don't really have to, like, I'm like working on a screen for us to print on, which we'll get to this week, making you guys a screen, and the original design that I had didn't quite work because it was too pixelated. So the resolution is really important for screen printing because especially if you're doing a emulsion design like this, where you're exposing a transparency with black as your design, you want to make sure that your resolution is really, really good, because if it's pixelated on the transparency, it's going to be pixelated on the screen. That's how good it exposes. So I'm working on now like a secondary design that has very clear lines so the pixelation is an issue, because it would be terrible to go through all this work and all of these steps only to have your design be pixelated on your t-shirt.
Yep. And you're doing a great job. I just want to say it's a beautiful design you got going. All right. And so one of the things that's really cool about screen printing is that photo emulsion process and the high level of detail you can get. If you're going to get that badge, the screen printing badge downstairs, it is kind of a 2-day process because the chemistry involved really requires 2 days. And so there's this great, I like to make stuff video that you can watch. We could click this. It's great. I mean, you should totally watch it to make sense of what's going to happen this week, because we're going to all do this together. But this process does take 2 days. If instead you have an idea, want t-shirt, and you want no downtime in between, like you need a shirt to wear out that evening, you can screen print those shirts other ways also. Since you're just trying to build a blocking, you can do that with vinyl. And so we're going to talk about the vinyl cutter the week after Thanksgiving. You could use the vinyl cutter and cut a sticker to also block on a screen, so that when you do your screen printing, you're able to transfer ink to a shirt and get it to work out just fine. There's some trickiness to it because the emulsion like fills in the screen. A sticker on the screen won't last as long. Like an emulsion, you can do hundreds of shirts. A sticker, you're going to get 10 shirts maybe, and then the sticker will start to come apart. But if you want a shirt and you want it now, you can totally do it with a vinyl sticker to be your masking for this process. It's really great for that piece, and that it's so much faster, and you can use any color vinyl, any scrap vinyl you can find that's the right size. Another thing that's worth mentioning is we've been talking about shirts a lot, but you can totally screen print onto paper, onto wood. Onto wood looks really nice. You cover it with a polyurethane and like it is there for forever. So you can print onto different things that you wouldn't expect. Metal looks really good. You got to make sure that you're like covering it afterwards, I think, right? It's another one where you need a coating on top of, probably.
It depends on the kind of ink you're using.
That's fair.
If you're using a ink that can be cured with UV light, that's pretty solidly bonded to the metal.
Sure.
I mean, you probably still want to protect it if you're like, it's going to be outside. Anything outside should be coated, because nothing's gonna, survive the weather without some sort of special coating. But you can do metal. You can do. I've seen some people do directly onto like a canvas, like stretched canvas. It just very carefully placing it on the board that is in the screen printing station. I've seen them like basically paint their background and then screen print on top of that background that they painted onto the canvas, and that's like their final design. Yeah, there's like a bunch of things that you can screen print that you wouldn't think that you would be able to.
Lisa's saying, and you can screen print onto glass,
Yeah.
which is really cool.
Yes.
That would be a cool, a neat look. If you have like a window display, something that you want to show off, that would be really fun. Anything that'll hold the ink and hold it well enough, I think is fair game. And that's, I mean, lots of things will take a paint to sit on their surface. So you've got lots of options. Online screen printing, super duper common. We've all seen the weird like clickbait ads for t-shirts. Those exist. It's very easy to get it done online, but it's also very easy to do here with the right effort. And you can make some really nice stuff with the screens that you'd screen print here. So digital printing. This is going to be short and sweet. First off, office printers. They're present and work sometimes. Printing things on a printer is fascinating. Just a pro tip, buy yourself treat yourself, get a laser printer for at home. Inkjet printers are a racket. The ink dries up and the sellers know it. So laser printers with toner work a little bit, their cost a little bit more upfront, but my own personal, maybe that's more my opinion than a real fact. But the laser printers their ink doesn't dry out on you. And so you pay $200 at the start, but then the toner lasts for a long time. And it's worth saying, there is a printer in MakeHaven. It is temperamental, but it does exist and it could work. And like printing just paper, there's a small fee. I think it's 5 cents for a print at MakeHaven. But printing an idea on paper is often a really great way to test out an idea, to test a fit. If you're trying to build something to a certain specific size, printing it out on paper can be really helpful. Also, there's a super fancy inkjet printer for printing photos. Denise, the textiles facilitator, figured out how to turn the thing on and print amazing quality photos. So if you want to print your own photos for whatever reason, you can totally do that here. Just message Denise. She's great at that particular machine. But a lot of the time, Office Space got it right with printers. Large format printing is another fascinating process. And this is really something that shines, this big Epson machine. This is a building size poster of LeBron James. I'm from Cleveland, everybody. And so this giant LeBron James poster is printed on a large format printer. That would have been in several vertical strips, not all in one go. There's no printer that size. But you stitch it together and it's far enough away you can't tell. So you can print on very large size scales. You can create incredible city defining work. Like this was an iconic piece of art in the city where everybody really liked to take photos in front of it. You can do all sorts of crazy things with large format printers, and there's all sorts of availability. You can print out full-sized textiles designs, and that's really nice, where you can just buy them as a design file and then print them out here. Denise has also done that. She made a handbag that Adam Savage had designed and then printed out the design from his website. This software, I will say, as a occasional user of that machine, it does feel awkward, but that's just, I think, because regular office printing is so common that like we're just used to being babied by printing software where you hit Control P and it does it. Like you don't have to do any other configuring. You were already writing in an 8.5 by 11 square, and like you don't have to do any. You just click print and that's it. If paper was always different sizes, it would feel more like this all the time, and that's really the awkwardness of this machine. But beyond that, works like a dream. It prints out at beautiful resolution, very high quality. One of the things to think about when you're printing this big, though, on a machine that size, is what's the starting resolution so that your prints come out at appropriate dots per inch so that it looks reasonable. It's the problem of an inflated raster image. You know, if you took a terrible camera photo and tried to print it 4 feet across, it's going to look bad. So think about that as you're working, but it's really a really cool process if you get a chance to work with Ruby on it.
I just wanted to mention that.
Oh, yeah.
So fine art printing is its own thing, and it's usually the inks are very specific, and the usually the reproductions, the fine art reproductions are usually like the color calibration that goes into that is very, very likely Pantone and not CMYK, because that is much more like they actually make colors that are just Pantone colors. And if you know that your print has Pantone red or Pantone like goldenrod or Pantone green, the printers will actually print only using those colors that are present that you've selected, or that. So it's like so every copy of that print, let's say, is going to be the exact same colors because they're specifically color grading or color calibrating the colors to your specifications. If you're, and this is like, if you're getting a very expensive Giclée print, for example, like that is calibrated to be as close to the original as possible, like color calibration it can get very, very, very difficult. And that's not something that like, I think making will ever get to that level, but there are like people who have to get their eyes checked every year to be able to do like Pantone color calibration.
Wow, that's incredible.
Like, yeah, like there's an intensity to this, to printing, that like we've come so far, but it gets very nitty gritty when you want to recreate fine art, or when you want to get very, very specifically like Coca-Cola banners, bulletins, like the ones that you see on like billboards. That is a very specific Coca-Cola red that they have.
Yeah.
That they like, if the printer doesn't have it, they send it to the printer. Like it has to be that red. It's important for the brand, and it's also like they don't want to have that color be any other color but Coca-Cola red. Like you can get like, printing kind of goes into the realm of like color and like color theory. Like that is a wormhole you can get so caught up in, and the science of color, and
that makes sense. It just as like I'm gonna say a possibly dumb thing just to check and see if it's wrong, right? Like when my inkjet printer at home starts to run out of cyan, and I'm trying to print something that's cyan and yellow mixed together, it just starts to shift more towards the yellow. The Pantone is like, I want to print Coca-Cola red. The ink they use is already the Coca-Cola red.
Yes.
They're not mixing at the time of printing. Okay, just like wanting to say that out loud.
Actually, yeah, it is offset lithography, but I was like, I didn't know like if I could say offset lithography and people would know what I was talking about. But yes.
Yeah, no, it's printing. It's amazing to me how good we are at it, that we're like well beyond visible resolution. It's incredible to see the sort of scale that we were able to hit. Awesome. So what are the things to do this week before we get to show and tell? Here's the few goals that we actually have for the week. First, we want to screen print a t-shirt for each of you. We want you to be able to screen print a shirt if you want. And so you could make your own prints if you wanted, but we are going to, hopefully, fingers crossed, if all the stars align, have a screen ready we have one, but we'd like a new one.
Yeah.
For this class specifically, where you can bring in a shirt of your own favorite size and print your own shirt from the screen that we'll have ready to go that says Foundations Class of 2022, because that's when we'll all be done together. And so we'll have that designed for you. And we're thinking Thursday at 7 p.m.
Yes.
And then maybe Sunday
So Sunday is probably looking like it'll probably be here at 3 o'clock.
Sure. Okay. So Thursday at 7, Sunday maybe 3 o'clock, and we'll
confirm.
Yeah, we'll confirm all those details. But we can all come in and print shirts together at those different times. So you can work on that. If you want to make your own prints this week, awesome. But we want to give some freedom this week to tie up loose ends. There's a lot that's happening. It's about to be Thanksgiving. You might be traveling. You might be busy. Maybe you want to get some projects done for presents between now and then. And so we totally get and support that. You could totally optionally make your own prints of whatever. If you want to make family Thanksgiving after a break year t-shirts to hand out at your family event, you could totally do that this week. That would be lots of fun. We're going to have a break week next week for the Thanksgiving holiday. Might be a good time to reorganize websites and do documentation stuff if it's been a minute since you've turned those buttons on. And then wildcard time is a great thing to do. I'm going to probably use the break week to do some woodworking myself, just because I got a project that I want to do. So all of those sorts of things you can do with this week. We want to screen print a shirt. we won't get to show and tell about all the things that you do this week until after we're back from the Thanksgiving break, which will be when we start our digital fabrications portion of the course. And so we'll be talking that week, we'll be talking about Inkscape and vinyl cutting stickers, which is a great place to get started. And so for this week, we want to do the screen print of a t-shirt Thursday, probably Sunday also. And
just to, because I see that there's a question.
oh yeah.
So the goal is to have both white and black ink that will work on most, like if you have a dark colored shirt, we'll use white ink. If you have a light colored shirt, we'll use black ink.
Yep. I'm probably going to do a dark shirt. I just like dark shirts.
I mean, if we have time, and we may do like a fun one-off, I'll probably do it to my shirt just to show you guys. You can get some really cool color mixes, like gradients with screen printing.
Ah.
Might be a cool technique to try, but I'm going to use a white shirt because it's like, you don't have to worry about the colors being opaque. You can just like mix whatever colors you want and get a cool gradient going. So if you want to try that, bring a white shirt. But otherwise, yeah, any color will do.
Sounds great. That's lots of options. And so pick your favorite color is definitely a fun way to make that work. Yeah, so that we are only a little long for the talking portion of the week. Do you think we can slide that design under the camera?
Together yet,
The
but
finished design. All right, we're gonna slide the design under the camera, make some adjustments here.
I gotta like lift it up.
Yep. We're doing logistics on our end. And so there is the MakeHaven Foundations of Fabrication, handmade art by Ileana. Way to go. Very nice. And so very excited to turn this into t-shirts for each and every one of you to try and make, just to have a little fun and enjoy the fact that we've made it this far.
For sure.
So,
but yeah, so the quick technical thing, try and make this as dark as possible. Then it's going to get scanned in and printed out on a transparency, hopefully more successfully than the last time.
yeah.
And if that doesn't work, I'm actually going to physically laser cut this out of a mat board and see if we can get actual letters to expose. But either way, we're going to try and make this work. If this doesn't work, we do have a backup screen. It's not as pretty, but it'll work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tons of cool stuff to do, look at, think about. Very excited to see these prints come together. And we'll cut back to us and people and this. Where's the zoom? And now we come to the always exciting portion of the class, which is to do the show and tell. And so there's lots of fun. This week was LED week, and so we got to try and play with blinkies. And truth be told, there weren't a ton of people that I saw throughout the week. And part of that is my fault. My car battery died yesterday. And so I spent the afternoon and evening working on that. Wasn't really able to come in, but hopefully you got some exciting things that you were able to work on this week, some lights to light up. And I'd love to hear how that went for everybody involved. So we can go through it a number of ways, but we could do, normally I try and decide whether we do in-person or virtual, but Vincent, you are both in-person and virtual. I feel like that's the way to lock yourself in as the first one to go. So Vincent, would you like to unmute? And you just jumped out of the thing. That's perfect. All right, you're rejoining. That's pretty good. So let's see. We're gonna try and do some show and tell sharing. And let me see. Multiple people can present. So Vincent, if you're ready, you could take over the screen and show us all what you've been up to.
I was going to.
We can't, I don't think I can hear Vincent.
Oh, Vincent, is your mic on?
No, it's not.
Okay.
Mute this.
I can mute my mic and you could turn yours on. if that works. Okay. Thanks, Arvia.
All right. Okay. So yeah, some stuff that I've worked on before, been practicing painting. I didn't do a whole lot for the LEDs, but what I wanted to do was learn how to use perf boards. We were talking about the different means of connecting the different components, and I had already used breadboards before, pretty comfortable with them. So I wanted to see what would I be able to do that's more compact, more permanent. So I started working on the perf boards, but just because I started to run out of time, I ended up having to switch to some other stuff, such as trying to compensate for some broken prints or trying to find out alternate ways of smoothing them out, things like that. With Julia's advice, I was able to coat some of these snails. Oh wait, actually, screw it, it's recorded anyway. I was going to say this is supposed to be a surprise. So in case the person who's going to get one of these is watching on YouTube, I'm supposed to hide this, but it's already on there, so it doesn't matter.
Well, not till Wednesday. We'll have them not look.
Right.
Mhm.
At any rate, I covered these up with XTC 3D. This one in the middle was one of my first attempts, and the antenna kept breaking off. Julia showed me how to put epoxy putty on it to reattach it, broke off again. So I thought, screw it, let's just embrace how it looks and be like, this one's seen some stuff. And yeah, I needed to make a tent to protect it from dust. Had to like ask people to not like touch it or lift this up or anything, or else I would look like this the next day.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Okay. So I also took the sewing class yesterday for making a tote bag. This is the handle. Learned how to use the resin printer, the Formlabs resin printer. And yeah, I also explored the brewing section while I was waiting for the cure.
Vincent, really
which
quick,
is
the
happening here. At least in
Y'all
the
hear me?
pretty done. That's about it.
That is awesome. It's great to see. Oh, okay. Back to the internet.
That's great. A question for Vincent.
Vincent.
Arvia's got something. Feel free to unmute
Unmute
and tell us.
Vincent, you might need to mute real quick.
Okay, can y'all hear me? Okay, no, it was just about one of the prints that you made. It looked, I couldn't see the picture fully. It went by too quick, but it looked like a cage, maybe something like that. Could you show that again? I just wanted to see what the last machine that you said you learned how to print on, what you made. You're muted, Corey, so I can't hear nothing else. Anything you were saying?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry. He was using the Formlabs 3D printer, which is a resin-based printer. There's printers that run off of hard plastic that then it gets melted and put into place. And then what he's pulling up is the Formlabs where you use a liquid to print. The printing resolution is monstrously higher. And so you get much better quality detail coming off of these prints. And what he printed was this, like, it was a betta fish, right? And so that betta fish that's hanging off of the ceiling, that basket, is there to sort of catch it if it falls off.
Oh, okay. I thought it was the basket. I was like, wait a minute, you printed that basket, but now I see the betta fish. Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah,
Wow,
and like the precision of that printer is unbelievably high. So if you wanted to do high quality detail work, there was a person in the class last year who was making molds for jewelry that were just unbelievable detail inside the pieces. And she, like, Ada would print stuff at very tiny sizes just to experiment the limits of the machine, and basically never bumped up against one that was meaningful enough that she had to stop. It's an incredible machine to really get at if you wanted to if you want to master this sort of a level of printing. So yeah, it's really cool. Let's see. Okay, next up, Lisa, you are top of the online list for me. Would you care to, if you're around, would you care to unmute and tell us what you were up to this week?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So I kind of went in and out of the wood shop to try to get that wood project done. And as you know, I did finish it. And I thought the easiest way to show everybody is if you could share your own screen where you.
Oh, yeah, I
webpage.
can absolutely do that. Let me share my screen and I will share this screen really fast. And instead, I'm going to pop over to, you sent me the link.
Yeah.
Yep. And so just a second, working on it. Here we go.
I scroll to the very bottom though.
All right.
So there we go.
Yeah.
So that's it. I mean, it's still there drying on the table. And when I go grab it tomorrow, I'm going to bring it home and add more coats just because it's going to require a little bit of steel wool rubbing and such. I might move on to tongue oil, I'm thinking. I don't really know. I have to see how all this feels when it dries. And because I want to have whatever's on there and I don't have to go back and add more in time. I just want it to be a finish that is final. So
Yeah.
Anyway, everybody, it was tough to make those rectangular holes because this wood turned out to be very brittle. And I had planned that the reverse side of that board was going to be the side that faced up, but those holes started fracturing underneath. So I flipped it over and I used a file, and that's how I got them in there. It was a lot of fun to figure it all out, I have to say.
I mean, it's incredible how I am endlessly impressed with your stick-to-itiveness with this project, Lisa. There's so many times in life where I have wanted that level of grit and resolve to stick with a thing, or that I've wanted to help someone else have that level of grit and resolve, and you just went after this.
Yeah,
So.
That's because I've tried other wood projects throughout my life where they're still sitting in a box waiting to be finished. And I said, this is not going to be another one of those.
Yeah, well, nailed it. And it's physically in the space like I saw it before class. And kudos to you. Great job. It looks great. It smells great while all the stuff is setting on it. And I think that you're going to be, once you get it and can like set your feet on it and relax and have just the right height, I think you're going to really enjoy this as an end product.
I can't wait. And
Yeah.
the other fun thing about it was I used so many different tools in the wood shop to make this happen. So I got an experience on lots of equipment,
Yeah. Even just thinking about like this side is unassumingly complicated, right?
Yeah.
Like you have this like curve that looks really nice. You have this dowel, which you made yourself on the lathe, the square stock. These posts are actually at an angle, so you couldn't just cut them vertically straight, right? So there's some complexity to that. That's very, very subtle. But each time you look at it, I hope that you remember like this is a lot of good joinery went into making this piece work.
Yeah, and the other thing is I completely invented this whole thing. It didn't exist in any plans anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a full creative work. And all of the joinery was just figured out for whatever needed to happen, which is really cool.
So that's that. I can now put that to bed. And I did do some things in the Arduino area. If you clicked on unit, 5, you'd see the photos I posted there and scroll down. So I did that one. And
Yeah.
It was fun how I hooked it all up. I said, well, it looks just like the picture. Why isn't it working? And you said, well, gee, I'll have to see it in person. And then I said, well, I found a video intro to Arduino, just this innocent little thing. And all of a sudden there's one little thing that said, and you had probably said, and I just didn't register, well, LEDs have polarity. I said, well, okay, so maybe I didn't put them in the right polarity, but why didn't the diagram kind of tip me off to which way, what needs to be positive and what needs to be negative? So anyway, I turned them all around and then it worked.
That's great. Yeah, it really I'm working on the sign in. I think it's this maybe. But in here, oh, hold on. It's the Tinkercad model is pretty not great at getting it to be clear about what the process is,
Yeah.
of what the polarity is, which is kind of a bummer, but you got it. You figured it out.
Yeah.
And then did they all just turn on? I didn't read any of this.
Oh, they blinked the way they were supposed to.
Awesome. That's great.
And then I did a lot of those tutorials that guy Jeremy
Yep.
posted, and not a lot. I mean, I started at the beginning, and so this was one where he runs you through the steps of how to code, how you code basically. And it was a simple thing to make that green light go on and off and on and off. And so
Yeah.
I did it, and the code is in one of the pictures, I believe, unless I might not have hit publish again.
publish.
So, but there is a picture of the code.
No, that's just like getting there and getting those things to be up and running it's very empowering. Like once you get it to turn on and do the blinking, it feels sort of hokey, but it's like a fun, exciting thing.
Yeah,
sure.
I wish I could do more. It's just that I really have to be careful that I take it step by step. Otherwise it gets overwhelming because it's really out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you're out of your wheelhouse, following instructions is like essentially the only way to get started.
Yeah.
And so that's good to know. When we go to the next unit, since I'm already screen sharing, we're going to be headed towards this digital fabrication. We're going to do lots of things, and then eventually this is going to be sort of wandering away from code a little bit, and then we're going to have a couple of coding things in one of these units coming up. But this is going to be very step-by-step, lessons 1 through 5, 6 through 10. It's going to walk you through how to do all the coding stuff. So it gives you plenty of guidance in how to make those things happen.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Which is always good. Yeah, no problem. All right, I'm gonna stop my share, bring this all back together. And let's see, we have, there's Renee, do you wanna go? You wanna come over here and chat with us about your week, or? No, you're good, you can just come say hi, say what's going on. Have a seat in front of the camera. Just tell us a little bit about.
So yeah, I had a bit of a low week this week and I wasn't feeling well, so I did not do my project this week. I'm hoping to catch up next week, so I'm really glad that it's going to be Thanksgiving break, and that I'll be able to catch up. But I did already start sketching some ideas for printing, and I do want to do my own designs for screen printing. So if I have the time and energy to do that, I'm really, really excited to learn how to do that. So
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Great. And everybody's gonna have up and down weeks. It's totally a thing. It's a part of the jam. When we're together for almost a year, everybody's gonna have them. And so it's exciting to take the time that you need, and then also to get back on the saddle is a lot of fun. James, how about you? You're next up in the virtual world.
Hello.
Hello.
So I had a lot of fun playing with the Arduino this week. I I did the same thing that Lisa did, your example from Tinkercad with the 4 flashing lights, which is really cool. I did the LED on the Arduino blinking on and off. And then I started to mess with some of Jeremy's stuff. I think I made it to like the 4th video, and actually here in front of me, I don't know if you can see this, but I did the pulse width modulation. So
Oh, cool.
this should get brighter until it turns off, which is pretty cool. Also, my battery phone charger powers the Arduino perfectly, and it's been on for a while, so that's also good to know. A quick thing with the code for the Arduino, especially in reference to Jeremy's tutorials, I found it really useful to physically type out all of the code by hand myself, just to like get it in my head a little bit. It's easier to copy and paste, but just typing it is like, it does something, especially with mistakes, because then you have to figure out what you did wrong.
Yeah, I think that that's honestly a great point, that like, it's really tempting to copy paste and have that instant feedback. But if you're really trying to learn, typing it is super helpful.
Yeah, and like he makes through that course of those videos, he makes changes to code that he already has. So like saving it as a new document and then physically making the changes along with him, and inevitably making mistakes and like using those mistakes to learn the syntax a little bit was like super cool and super useful. And I feel like I kind of am like, wow, now I can really learn this and put my hands on it and like start manipulating it a little bit better.
Yeah.
But I think the Arduino is super cool. Like just what I did with it this week. Like I did a bunch of different stuff, you know, and on off, and I ran into problems that you went through his tutorials. Super cool, super fun. So
Yeah, it definitely is the closest thing we can get to magic in our time together, where like you want something to happen and it can just do it. It can just like respond in real time.
Yeah, and like he has the oh God, what is it, the thing where the bounce decoder,
Yes.
where you press the button and it reads the button press so many times as it cycles, so you have to make a thing to, there's just complicated stuff going on. It's very cool to play with.
Yeah, it's real. I think it's really helpful. He is an electrical engineer, and so it's really great to get his perspective as you're going through it, because he also makes it approachable. Talking sort of through the process, drawing it out by hand in a lot of cases, so that it's easy to see what he's doing. It's a great tutorial series. It's literally how I started to understand Arduino. So.
It's super great.
Yeah,
fun, a lot of fun. But that was it. I basically just messed around with this all week. Tons of different LEDs. Actually, I also I blew up one of these little red LEDs. It cracked in half.
There you go. That's fun. Yeah, it's good. Just over voltage and they just pop, which is lots of fun.
Yeah.
So awesome. Great work. Cool times. And let's see, next up, Arvia, are you around? Do you think you can unmute, chat with us a little bit?
Yeah, I will turn my camera on too. Hey y'all, I actually don't have anything to share this week. I've been pretty much away the last 2 weeks celebrating my birthday and take some time off work.
Happy
but
birthday.
I got to, thank you. I got to come in on Thursday last week though to catch up some on the soldering with Corey, and that was really cool. I'm going to take the next week to update my website and I'm hoping I wouldn't do too much. I need to channel Vincent and like be very like organized about my time and my projects, because I am like complete opposite of you, Vincent, honestly, with like your projects and having them planned out. But I think I want to do a hat on the embroidery machine because I haven't done that yet. And I also want to do a print because I didn't realize how easy it was to carve out of the linoleum. But I've always wanted to try that because I have a bunch of little prints in my house from artists that I love. So Yeah, those are, I think, my two or three things: website, the hat, and possibly a print.
Yeah, that sounds like a great time. The block print, I think you're gonna have a blast, Arvia. It seems like it's right up your alley. The tools we have are in the block print tools are in the printmaking area, and then I think there's a set actually in the like blue bins, sort of over by the quilting machine, the new quilting machine. So we have them in a few places. So there's more than enough of those. And then we have some of the blocks, but if you also wanted to get your own, you totally can.
There's a limit to the size of the ones that are in the section.
Oh yeah.
So if you want to go bigger, you can definitely find them pretty easily. But I think the biggest that the ones that we have are like 5x7, so postcard size. But I would also like, it takes a lot longer than you think to actually like carve out all the area. So I wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, 5x7 is too small. Like the one that I showed you is pretty much like a almost like 6x8. So it's not like terribly big, but this also took me like 2 hours. So I wouldn't go bigger than this if it's a really complex design. But
Yeah, that's
if
super
you want to
helpful.
go bigger, I would just say give yourself a little bit more time than you would think to really kind of carve everything out, because your hands are going to get tired too. Like you want to take breaks.
In my head, what I'm going to do is I've been trying to find projects I can just do with my hands during work, during meetings. Some people are wasting my time. So in my head, I'm going to like draw it out and do some carving like while I'm in the work meetings. I don't have to, really be engaged in. So that's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, that's a great way to spend a meeting, is to do, I'm going to be fiddling with something in my hands anyways during a meeting, whether I'm in person or remote, and having something that's like productive, creative art sounds like a fantastic way to spend a meeting. Awesome. Cool. And then let's see, Norm, you're last but certainly not least. We'd love to hear what you've been up to this week. If you got any LEDs to blink or did anything else that was fun. If you're around.
Yeah, I think now I'm working. Well, yeah, so I know nothing about electronics, and I did the Arduino board stuff, blinking and fading, and I found that the Tinkercad simulator was really, really useful to me. It didn't work when I used the breadboard at first, and then I did the simulator and figured out what was wrong. So that was very useful. And I started thinking about, I'd like to make possibly make a light box to illuminate a stained glass panel. I began work on, and I know I experimented a little bit with 2032 batteries and LEDs, but I also got this flexible stuff, and I got scared because I don't want to burn it out, and I don't know how to connect it. It said a 9-volt battery or else a 12-volt battery, and I didn't know if I had to put transistors in up front, or whether they're built into the tape or whatever. So I haven't really used it for fear of destroying it.
Yeah, no, that is a good set of questions. And building a light box is something you could talk to Kate Sevick, she's the facilities manager here. I don't know what her title officially is. But Kate, who's K8 on Slack, she built a light box for stained glass that she made last year, and it was really cool.
Oh, wow.
Hers was addressable LEDs, so she could turn them on and off and like have animations from the LEDs themselves, which was really awesome. But the strip that you've got, I think, would turn on and do a really nice job of just lighting them up.
Well, I mean, I took a 9-volt battery and used alligator clips to connect it, but it didn't seem to go on. But I was also afraid that I would suddenly burn it out. Is that all I need to do? Just
yeah, so essentially yes, and I think that for that strip it's very likely going to have the resistors built into the strip.
Yeah,
as long as you can apply 9 volts it should work. The problem is that you need to get enough current to go with those volts. And the like 9-volt batteries that we use at home in fire alarms or whatever, they're built to be perfect for a fire alarm. So they have almost no current draw for long spans of time. And then when they need to go, they just do very short bursts of high current. They're not good at running LEDs like that. But the next time you come into the space, bring that strip with you. We'll plug it into a power supply and it'll just light right up.
All right, so it should be powered by a power supply. If I cut it to a very short length, would it more likely go on from a battery?
Yeah, it probably would. It's just going to be a lot. If you have the full strip, it's probably too much for that battery to really supply. Like it'll be drawing current from the battery, but you won't get enough current to actually illuminate the LEDs.
All right, so alligator clips just to the red and black nodes at the end should light it up. It doesn't have to be a complete circuit going back to the other end.
Right. So if you just if you actually, it's going to sound weird, but if you have an old 12-volt car battery around and you plug the red to the red of the car battery and the black to the black of the car battery, that should work because car batteries are about 12 volts, or like a lawnmower battery, or sometimes you've got those big 9-volt battery backups for like floodlights in a garage, maybe. Those sorts of batteries, those could all work. You just need a battery that's got more of a kick to it. It can supply more current than the standard.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. I was worried about the transistor, but I did figure they probably were embedded.
Yep. Yeah, they're very likely in there. If you can look in and see little black squares, rectangles, those are the resistors.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So cool. I think that is everybody who's live with us tonight for presenting. And I think that we did it. We made it through everybody. We talked about all of the different things. We went through ideas and printmaking together, and we did a lovely little show and tell to get updated on how things are going. This is going to be our last class before Thanksgiving. We're going to get together. There'll be a few interesting things that are worth mentioning. One is that this week, like we said, on Thursday at 7 p.m., there's going to be a session where you can screen print a shirt. And then on Sunday at 3, which we'll confirm. And so there's some cool stuff there. This is just as a fair notice, this is a busy week for me. This Saturday, I am going to be attending a wedding in Columbus, Ohio. So on Friday afternoon, evening, I'm going to be flying out of town and I'll be back on Sunday. If I'm back and awake and all the stars align, I'll try and be at the Sunday screen printing session also. But I might still be, it's not jet lag because it's the same time zone, but very sleepy from a quick 48 hours in Ohio. So we'll see how that goes. But very excited to get everybody in, do some screen printing. Everybody can get a t-shirt or print it onto a bag or print foundations wherever you'd like to put it, onto the back of a charcuterie board if you wanted to. All of those are perfectly reasonable options. So excited to see everybody in the space again and to get to it for this week. So thanks, everybody. Have a great night.